Hello, and welcome to the final episode of Tales of the Extraordinary with me, Sarah Butcher. The global energy sector is full of fascinating women who have forged amazing careers. Each one has taken a unique path to get where they are, influenced by their different backgrounds and circumstances. This podcast mini-series aims to spotlight on some of these fantastic women as they share the hurdles they've overcome, as well as their secrets for success. In this last episode, I'm speaking to Technical Safety and Risk Division Manager Jill Watson, who is based in Houston, Texas. Jill is also an incredible force of nature. Having followed in her father's footsteps to be a nuclear engineer, she has since achieved not one, but 3 university degrees. She has also navigated significant life changes after a trauma, grown a successful side hustle business, and manages to squeeze in time for her passion, the great outdoors. Hello, Jill.
Hi, Sarah. How are you?
I am very good. I'm very excited to be talking to you.
Me too. I'm very excited.
I think I just want to say thank you to start with, because you've not really been with Xodus for that long, have you? You've only been with us for about a year.
Exactly.
So, yeah, thank you for trusting and coming on and sharing your story with me. I really appreciate it.
Xodus has been very welcoming, and I feel part of the team already.
Oh, good. So we'll jump right into it, and I'll ask you the first question, which is, why energy?
That's a great question. So my route into the energy sector actually started in my upbringing with my family. My father was a nuclear engineer and a physicist. And because of who he was, I was exposed to some things very early in my life. And because of these things, I'm quite sure that this played a role in how I went on to become an engineer and to remain an engineer for most of my career. So some of my earliest memories were playing in my dad's workshop in the basement of our house. And my dad could fix anything, and I do mean anything. At the time, he kind of had a side business where he fixed neighbors' radios and their record players and their toasters. And so my brothers and I were just fascinated by everything that was in his workshop. And one of my memories is what I liked most was he had a collection of resistors. And so resistors are these electronic devices that are used to supply energy. But as a child, these resistors were like beads to me. They were colorful and they had stripes on them. And so I would be there in the basement. I would sort them and I'd line them up and I'd make shapes with them. It was kind of like my Lego set. So as time went on, our basement kind of became the hub for where we did everything. We went and built a Barbie house for me. And then my brothers would fix their dirt bikes and the lawnmowers. And then my dad went on to build a sailboat in the basement. And so I'm pretty confident that the time that I spent in the basement of my youth was pretty much influenced both my brothers and my own career path in the future. My oldest brother went on to become a software and computing engineer. And then my second brother went on to become an architect based on his love of the design and building of houses. So when it came to the point of me to figure out what was I going to do, I was a little bit all over the map. I liked a lot of things, maybe law or maybe something more sciencey. I really enjoyed my high school chemistry classes. But that's kind of when my parents stepped in and provided some nicely rewarded parental guidance. And I did listen at this point in life. And they gave me this push to go ahead and try engineering, just to try it and see if you liked it. And so I did settle on a career in engineering, but I still wanted a little bit of independence with my father having been a nuclear engineer. So I entered college as an engineer, but not a nuclear engineer. And then when I entered college, I went as a legacy. I was this next generation. I was following the same path of one of my family members, and that was my father. And so at that time, I was attending the same university, North Carolina State University, and in the same college, the College of Engineering that my father was in. That made me very proud, and certainly my parents very proud. So to actually answer your question about what was my pathway into energy, after about 10 years outside of college, working as a chemical engineer and doing things like process design and safety, I did end up entering into the nuclear industry and truly following in my father's footsteps. And again, that ended up being something that was very special for both my father and myself.
When you turned up on that first day at university, what was that like, walking into that setting, knowing that you kind of had this legacy hanging over your head? Maybe it wasn't hanging, maybe it was something to step into. How did you feel?
Well, I was super proud. I also think that I was already a daddy's girl. And I know, Sarah, you and I have talked about this a little bit. So horoscope wise, so my dad and I are in the same horoscopes, and we were both the youngest child in the family, and I was the only girl and he was the only boy. So I felt like we had some innate things that were very similar to each other. But getting into college, and the same college, walking in the same places that my dad was pretty exciting for me. And I did love college life. I kind of went crazy. I joined everything. It was my first taste of real independence for me. It was my first time living by myself and managing my own life, making my own decisions. So I did kind of jump in head first and did a lot of things at the university. I was elected as the secretary for the Engineers Council, and we kind of planned career fairs, and we had competitions between the mechanical engineers and the chemical engineers. Also, when I was in university, I worked as what they call a stately lady. And what that was is I was an ambassador for the College of Engineering, and any kind of new incoming or high school students that were looking to both play sports and to attend college in the University of the Engineering would come through. We would take them around the university. We would give them a tour, and then we would help make sure that they got in front of all of their advisors to learn, what they needed to get into the university. So I felt like I gave back quite a bit. But really, one of the best things that happened when I was in college and being a female engineer was that I joined a sorority. And I joined a sorority called Chi Omega. It is a social sorority, but also at the time, it was primarily made up of sisters that were also engineering students. And so it was kind of that camaraderie that provided me kind of with the glue that kind of kept all of us female engineers together. And during this time, there was actually a very low enrollment for female engineers. And so being in the sorority kind of really gave us as female engineers the space that we needed.
What did it give you, having that ability to talk to those other women?
Well, it was supposed to be just our fun time. But the other thing that was so important was the numbers. So in my curriculum in chemical engineering, at any point in time, there were over 100 students, but there were only like 5 or 6 female students. And I suspect in all of the other disciplines was the same. So it was this sorority. We were all of a sudden the dominant. So we were all female engineers. So it just, as I say, it just gave us the space to be ourselves. And, we had the same challenges and the same concerns. And it was just such a good sounding board and space for us.
When I did my intro, I mentioned that you had done 3 degrees. So did you do all of your degrees at North Carolina?
I did. I did all 3 of my undergraduates. I entered as a chemical engineer, and I found I really liked it. And I took to the chemistry classes. So I decided that I wanted to do more of that stuff. And so I decided to take a couple of extra classes, and I went to summer school, and I was able to also get my bachelor's degree in chemistry. And then at the same time, I was very interested in the mathematics part. I don't know why, but I just really kind of enjoyed the mathematics part. And I also took a couple of extra classes and some summer school sessions. So I ended up graduating in 5 years with 3 bachelor's of science degrees.
I think that's incredible.
Well, my parents actually pulled the plug, right? So they're like, all right, you're done. You are sufficiently
you're educated
degreed.
now. Yeah.
Exactly.
Stop having fun and it's time for the real world.
Yeah. But I guess one other point, This was really important in my family, but it was important, for my father in me following in his footsteps. But it was also very important for my mother, because my mother was raised in a family of 3 children, and she was the second. And the family only had enough money to send one of their children to college. And so they sent her older brother, who was the boy. And my mother always regretted that decision from her parents. She really wanted to go to college. And so it was important for her to have all of her children attend college and graduate from college. But for her, it was way more important for her daughter to graduate. I feel like, a lot of the pushing and the impetus came from behind with my mother. And I know she was just as proud of my success as my father was with me following in his footsteps.
Yeah, I bet she was. And when you finished your degree, what was your first job? How did you go from college through to nuclear and then finally into oil and gas?
My first jobs were environmental engineering jobs. And what we were doing is finding some of these sites that had been contaminated, and had environmental problems. At that point in time, there was a lot of underground storage tanks that were leaking. And so as an engineer, I would basically design the systems that would remediate all of the spills or releases or the contamination. And so what that looked like is, as a process design engineer, I was working with designs such as soil vapor extraction, pulling contaminated hydrocarbons out of the soils, and also groundwater pump and treat systems where you're pulling water up from the aquifer and sending it through all different types of treatments. I remember I actually had one really cool job, and you would not believe that this is possible, but I would drive my little station wagon across the flight path at an Air Force base. And in the middle of it was a soil vapor extraction system. And so I would park my little station wagon out there, and I would go and download the data from the system and check everything. And the F-15s were taking off and landing on both sides of the runway. And you could never do that anymore at this point. But it was just such an interesting thing to be driving your car across a runway where airplanes are taking off.
Definitely. Just that noise, I'd imagine, where you're working.
Well, I'm waving to the pilots and, the whole thing as they're getting ready to take off. So I did a lot of this kind of environmental background. And then a couple of years into my career here in the U.S., the Environmental Protection Agency issued some new guidance. And with that guidance was the advent of what is now the process safety requirements. As part of that, we were going around to all different kinds of facilities, pulp and paper mills, melting factories, every kind of industrial process you could think of, and taking a look at, what are the potential impacts from your operations to the environment. And then it was assessing those threats from a risk standpoint, and then enabling the organization there to actually have plans to be more proactive in controlling their chemical releases and handling their materials, their hazardous materials and what have you. And so that's kind of where I got my next phase of life, was looking at those consequences from any kind of environmental impacts, and then with the idea that it could potentially become either a pollutant, airborne pollutant, or it could be something in the groundwater. And my role was trying to determine what the environmental impact was from modeling those releases, either airborne or, through a stream or the aquifer.
It feels like you have done such a variety of jobs. Have you ever been like, oh, I'm a woman, or have you just, it feels like sky's the limit for you? You're just taking opportunities.
Yeah, I do think I would call myself fearless. I loved being outside. I loved touching the machinery. I liked to put my hands on. At one point, I did testing of a smokestack. So I would climb smokestacks on a routine basis. And it's just getting your hands on, seeing what's happening, getting your head out of the book was something that I really, really enjoyed. I mean, I think I didn't necessarily go directly into some concentration. You could never say, oh, well, she's best at this or she was best at that. And I think that speaks a little bit to the diversity of my education. And then again, to the diversity of kind of my first 10 years of work experience.
And you grew up in North Carolina, but you've ended up in Houston, Texas. How did that journey happen?
Well, I love new places and I love new opportunities. And I think most of my moves have been career driven, maybe where I was looking for something else. As I mentioned, I worked for 10 years kind of in this environmental role. But I did start in my hometown where I graduated from in Raleigh. But then with the company I was working for, I transferred and worked for a couple years with them in Chicago. And then it's that company that decided that they would send me to grad school. And so then I moved to Colorado to attend the University of Colorado in Boulder to get my master's degree in chemical engineering. And the company I was working for at that time also had a headquarters in Denver. So it was the same company, and I moved 3 different times with that company, ending up in Denver, Colorado. And so I think that kind of is where my ability to transition, moving away from my family, away from my comfort zone, and being able to take those opportunities that came my way. And then also when I finished my graduate degree, I ended up with that same company moving all the way back to North Carolina at that time. And it's a company that I left when I moved into my next phase of career, which was my involvement in following in my father's footsteps, my involvement with the nuclear industry.
Throughout your career, you've had a family, you've got 2 girls?
I do. I have 2 wonderful daughters.
And how has that been, juggling being a mum, taking time off to have kids, and then coming back into the energy industry?
Well, that has been a challenge. So our family life had some disruptions. My husband passed away of a short illness when my children were fairly young. They were, I believe, 8 and 14 at the time. And so it was definitely a time in my life where I do feel very vulnerable. And particularly, I mean, obviously it extended beyond my family life and it extended into my work life. And I think that's probably where a lot of my challenges came, both in my personal life and in my career. So I was always trying to juggle things, and particularly within the workplace. So I didn't want to be seen as somebody that couldn't hold the work, being a single parent, and then with all of these new challenges. And so from my perspective, I always felt like I was a bit on pins and needles. I always felt like I needed to demonstrate that I was committed to my job. But even more, I felt like that I needed to maybe go above and beyond just to keep my job. And I felt like I always had to be on. I needed to be available. I needed to quickly respond to every email and every call. And it just proved very hard to juggle everything at all the time. And I had some tricks of the trade. I would put fake meetings in on my calendar, and that would allow me to have that space to race to the school in the afternoon for pickups. But kind of the worst part was when I had to travel. So traveling was difficult because both I had to leave my kids behind. I had to leave them with a nanny, but also it was a financial burden to some degree. So you're traveling while you're getting paid with your travel expenses, but the cost for nannies and sitters is pretty hard. It adds up for sure. And oftentimes I felt like I was a bad mother, but I did have wonderful help. We had great sitters and nannies. And I have to admit that when I did travel, I did kind of enjoy those hotel rooms by myself a couple of those times. But I guess when I look back, work is work, but family matters first. There's no such thing as perfect job, perfect family, but just do the best you can and family comes first.
I mean, I can't even imagine going through that and having to be everything all at once to everyone. what an incredible lady you are, I think. That's what I'd like to say. Just being able to find your path through all of that and being still so kind and patient. I enjoy speaking to you all the time. You're so uplifting and fun. And I think, carrying some of the stuff you've had to could make you a very different person. Who has helped you on the way? Who are the people that have kept you being you through everything? The people that have inspired you and supported you?
Well, first of all, thank you, Sarah. And I enjoyed time spent with you as well. And I do want to say that, some of the good things that come out of all of your challenges in life is that it does kick you off the rails, right? But sometimes following, the straight path forward isn't as enjoyable or beneficial as actually what is the road less traveled, right? But the rocky roads, so who I have in my life when the roads are rocky. So I am very fortunate. My daughters are amazing. They are my cheerleaders. They're old enough now to start being able to give back in a great big way and encourage me forward. Sometimes I get a little frustrated because I still feel like I'm mom and I'm not ready to change that role and have daughters that are way wiser than I am, but could be worse, right? But so I do speak. I did have a wonderful family. We're all very close. We're very supportive of each other. Along the way, I had very dear girlfriends that allowed me to be who I was. And in my group, I was the nerd, right? They were the fun parts and they brought those parts of me out. And I'm very grateful for the friendships that I've had. And then along the way in my career, I've had a lot of colleagues and have been very fortunate to have colleagues that felt the same way I did. And we could talk to each other. And even where I am now today, when I came on board with Exodus, my references were all people that I had worked for recently and, shared a wonderful experience working together and, that were uplifting and made life and work fun to come to on a daily basis.
Good. Well, thank you very much for that. I am going to now move on to my next question. What would you say has been your biggest challenge to date?
My biggest challenge is myself. It's the barriers we put in front of ourselves. It's the voice in your head telling you you're not doing something right or you're not doing it good enough or you should be doing more. Those are my challenges. And it's not an easy challenge to overcome, but time and distance and retrospection helps a lot. It's nice to look back and see the young generation of women leaders and women engineers. I think society has changed quite a bit, that being vulnerable at home and at work is more acceptable than it was in the past. I do believe, in the past, growing up, being a young engineer and then being a young mother, I think there was a lot of expectations to pretend like you weren't a female or that you weren't a mother. And in this day and time, I think we're much better at celebrating the fact that we are women and that we are mothers.
And that as women, we actually have a whole incredible skill set to bring to the table that is different and interesting and very valid.
And then again, I think COVID did a lot to also bring out the role of men and their families during COVID. We saw everybody's children's and dogs and kitty cats and the whole works. So as much as we didn't like COVID, I think it did a lot for our workforce and the way we work.
I definitely agree on that. I definitely think that it's now easier for everyone to talk about their families, their children, their requirements, to be part of both a work life balance. I definitely think has shifted. When you're dealing with that voice that is telling you too much, it's too loud, what do you do to help you step away from the noise?
Well, I read the book and you're supposed to tell the voice to be quiet. So recognize it and be quiet. But for me, it's being outdoors. I love the outdoors. I've been fortunate to live both in the mountains and in the beaches, but I just love being outside. You never see the same thing. I love hiking. And as I say, that's one of the places that I find my peace again, because there's no expectations. You don't have to plan everything. And you can plan everything because you're going to see what you're going to see. You're going to get rained on. You're not going to get rained on. But it's just special for me to keep my head in this kind of unstructured time where all you're supposed to do is look around and see the sights as you're walking past them. So that's been kind of a great healer for me through my years. And it does, again, start from my childhood. We would camp together. And then as a couple, we would hike together and climb mountains, which extended then to our family with my children. And I have a story about my youngest child. We were all hikers. She was a reluctant hiker. And so we had a favorite hike up what was called Twin Sisters. And at every switchback along the way, we had to stop and give her a little mini Oreo. And it was her treat to go up to the next switchback. So, yeah, it truly was kind of our family's approach to unwinding and spending quality time together. And for me personally, just to kind of step away from the world and calm the voices in your head.
I like that. I definitely, as a kid, was a reluctant hiker, so I can share those feelings. Are there any areas that are challenging for women that you don't think that we are talking about enough yet?
Well, I think we can still speak to the confronting workplace situations, the male-female interactions that we have in the office. I think we've come a long way in that arena, but I think we still have work that needs to be done. I've been pretty lucky, but during the course of my career, I have been put in two different situations where I felt uncomfortable and I felt like I had been approached inappropriately. And it's very hard to speak up and to have a voice. And it's really difficult to go to the highest levels of management and tell your story. Nobody feels comfortable with that. But the other thing that becomes very uncomfortable is when they start asking you questions about, like, what do you want us to do? How do you want us to solve this problem? And that's the response I got the two times that I spoke up for myself. And I just think that we need to do a better job at the organizational level. An organization needs to have those procedures and those processes, and you've got to follow them. It's not up to the person who feels uncomfortable to decide the fate of the offender. And it can go both ways these days, right? But I just think that we have some room to improve in this area.
It is important that we create a space for people to speak up and, like you said, put those processes and procedures so that people feel safe in doing it. Thank you for bringing that up, because I think it is a hard thing to talk about and to share. So I really appreciate you being so honest. The next topic that I'm going to ask you about is your greatest success. What would you say has been your greatest success?
Yes. So that is my side hustle, right? So one of my achievements that I'm very pleased with, well, what happened here in the U.S. was on September 11th of 2001, we saw the planes hit the Twin Towers of the World Trade Center. And I was watching this happen on a TV in the office of my daughter's school. And so what I saw in the faces of the parents, they were racing to school. Everybody was trying to pick their children up. We were all very scared and upset. And so the impact of 9/11 really rattled me as a parent. So I was trying to make sense of this new world that my children would be living with, and how we're going to come out of this, and feel comfortable again. So one of the positive outcomes was there was this surge of patriotism after this event. And so it happened in September, and Christmas was coming up. So I decided I was going to put my efforts into having a Christmas theme that was patriotic. So everything was going to be red, white, and blue. And so I went out looking for decorations, and I wasn't able to find red and white and blue decorations. So at this point, I had an infant at home. She was 6 months old. And so I decided I was going to putter around the house and I was going to make ornaments for my Christmas tree. So I made all of these hand-painted red, white, and blue ornaments, and I showed them to my friends, and everybody was buying them for their tree. And then one friend suggested that I go by the local gift shops and see if they'd want to sell them, for Christmas. So I did that, and I was hugely successful. And they sold everything I could make and asking for more. So at that point, I figured I was onto something. So I ended up building a company that had hand-painted and very unique Christmas ornaments. And it became so successful that I was showing at the 2 largest wholesale gift markets in the U.S. And so my daily life was covered in paint and cleaning brushes and drying ornaments. It was so exciting. And I guess I was bolstered by all of the positive comments that I got. And so my little cottage business just kind of quickly snowballed. And as I say, it got to the point where very large corporations and national department stores were asking for my product. One store wanted to give, ornaments to the first 100 people in the doors. And then there was an online selling website on TV. You could buy the ornaments from them. So while it was super fun, it did become quite a bit of lot of work, and it was more that I was willing to put in. So I actually closed that business, and that is when I turned to my new career in engineering, and that is when I went into the nuclear industry, coming full circle and following my father's footsteps.
What an amazing story. When you were there, just making them for yourself, and then it grew and grew and grew, did you surprise yourself by being so entrepreneurial?
I did. I learned so much. And having a brother that's an architect, he was always the creative one. So I felt like, I can kind of do this as well. And then I learned so much about business, from invoices and mailing and shipping and packaging and then labor force. I hired everybody I could find to work for me. I had my daughter stuffing boxes, and my best friend was bringing me supper. And yeah, it was so exciting. And I think that's why I'm so proud of it is, it was totally out of my comfort zone. And I'm most proud of the fact that I had this idea and that I saw the future of the idea, and then I actually was able to manifest it.
So many people have that idea, but they just won't take that leap. So yeah, well done.
And who would have thought hand-painted Christmas ornaments could be a pathway to success?
But exactly, who knows what the next great idea is? So you have to take it. I think it's brilliant. My last question, what is the one piece of advice you would give your younger self?
I would tell myself to be braver earlier and to break out of the mold. I think particularly even more so in our society today, I think there's a lot of influence trying to push people to be less themselves, but more like others. It's only if I think about the best people in my life and the people that are so unique, it's the people that have taken that path that's less traveled. And I think being brave and being willing to not fit in will be most rewarding going forward.
Oh, brilliant. Thank you, Jill. I'm going to take the path less traveled and make it okay for you. So I'm going to take those bits of advice and put them into my life. Thank you so much for your time and for sharing. I really, really appreciated it. And I will leave you to have the rest of a lovely day.
Well, thank you. And, thank you, Sarah, for letting me share my stories, because some of this I don't necessarily remember. And it's only by you prompting me. And it's nice to remember all of these things and how I got here. So thank you for helping me with my journey.
Thank you. Well, that draws this final episode of the podcast miniseries Tales of the Extraordinary to a close. For now, a big thank you to all of my guests, Tash, Stacey, Dami and Jill. and to you all for joining me. I hope you've enjoyed these as much as I have, and each personal story has left you feeling inspired and motivated. I can't say goodbye without saying a huge thanks to my team behind the scenes, Gail and Pam at Big and Rachel from Xodus. If you've missed any of the series or would like to share or listen again, all 4 episodes are available via our website and social media channels. Until the next time, take care.
Tales of the Extraordinary is brought to you by the Xodus Empowering the Energy Industry team and produced by the Big Partnership.